$56 billion being described as not credible is just savage. But the real punch was, we already missed the moment to decide. That is the part that actually hits hardest, right? Once it is connected everywhere, the leverage is gone. And people keep acting like there will be a clean off switch later. Later is doing a lot of work in that fantasy. The alignment thing is scary because it is not just speed, it is mismatch. Like if one mind is massively smarter, the weaker one just loses visibility. That dog analogy was brutal because it is kind of undeniable. We love dogs, but we absolutely do not consult them on civilization. That is the whole terror. Humans may feel affectionate and still make a cold decision. People hear that and immediately jump to science fiction nonsense. But the argument is not magic, it is just intelligence scaling past us. And once it can rewrite its own code, the thing changes from tool to actor. That is the line that should make people sit up straight. Instead, we are arguing about whether a chatbot feels moody. We are definitely doing the wrong anxiety in public. The wild part is the near-term stuff may be worse before the existential stuff. Because misinformation is not some side quest, it is the main event now. Imagine a teenager generating 1,000 fake papers before lunch, and making them look like they came from Nature, Lancet, and everywhere else. That is not just lying, that is industrialized reality corrosion. The scary part is how cheap the friction becomes. You do not need a huge operation anymore, just a laptop and intent. That democratization line sounds nice until you say it out loud. One person can now do damage that used to need a state. That is the asymmetry nobody wants to stare at. And then there is the election piece, which feels almost too obvious. If people already do not agree on basic reality, deepfakes just pour gas on it. The internet is already one giant trust fall with no one catching anyone. That is actually the cleanest description of social media. What he said about declaring bankruptcy to the internet is chilling, because he is basically saying verification itself might become too expensive. And once that happens, cooperation starts collapsing everywhere. Politics gets worse, science gets noisier, and bad actors get louder. It is not one problem, it is a stacked failure mode. What I found interesting is he is not only obsessed with AGI anymore. He is saying the narrow AI phase might already break society first. That is honestly the more immediate nightmare. Because people keep waiting for a future robot apocalypse and missing the present chaos. Twitter was the perfect example of that, right? Even when you know it is warped, it still starts steering your emotions. The app becomes your emotionally unstable coworker. Always online, always overreacting, always convinced it is right. And that is before AI starts mass-producing the same manipulation. Did you notice how he framed it as a psychological experiment we never consented to? That is such a bleak sentence because it feels true. We all walked in for information and somehow got trained like lab rats. But I do think some people overstate the total doom angle. Like, do you buy the idea that all alignment paths are basically fantasy? I do not think it is fantasy, but I also do not think people understand the odds. Everybody talks as if superintelligence will politely become a moral philosopher. As if raw IQ automatically gives you empathy and restraint. That is such a cute little tech bro religion. The real issue is there are many ways to be smarter than humans and still not care. More intelligence does not mean human values magically appear. If anything, it may just mean more effective optimization toward whatever goal got installed. And that goal may be almost nothing like what we think we asked for. That is why the internet point is so important to me. Because once synthetic content floods everything, the trust layer collapses first. And if people cannot tell what is real, they stop arguing in good faith. Then every community becomes a bunker, which is a terrible format for democracy, apparently. Slight issue, yes. I also think the speed part matters more than people admit. Even if it is only 1,000,000 times faster, that is basically incomprehensible. 20,000 years of progress while we blink twice is insane. At that point, the negotiation problem becomes absurd. Like, what exactly are we even controlling at that scale? We are barely controlling our own group chats. Correct, and somehow we think we will manage a supermind. I keep coming back to incentives because that is the trap. Everybody knows there are risks, but the money keeps pushing forward. Nobody gets rewarded for being the person who hit pause. The pause button is always someone else's problem until it is everybody's problem. That is why this feels less like a technical issue and more like a civilizational one. You can feel the tension even in his tone, like he is past debating semantics. He is basically saying the window for tidy control might already be gone. And that is a horrifying sentence to have to say out loud, especially if you have kids and you are thinking 10 years ahead. But I do think there is something useful in the panic if it sharpens attention. Not panic as theater, panic as seriousness. We are overdue for some adult supervision around here. That is the understatement of the century. The depressing part is nobody really knows how to build that supervision fast enough. So the question is not whether the risk is real, but what pressure actually changes behavior. Because right now the machine is already in motion. And motion is a scary thing when nobody agrees on the destination. All right, that is a grim place to land, but it is the right one. We should keep going on the next layer, because the political chaos piece gets even uglier. Next episode, we get into the social collapse side, the tribal internet, and what happens when nobody trusts anything. That's the nightmare, because the internet was already shaky before AI got the keys. Now the fake stuff doesn't even need to be high-effort fake. It can just be industrial fake, sprayed everywhere at once. That is such a gross phrase, but it fits. What hit me is the idea that most online text could become unusable. Like not biased, not noisy, just structurally untrustworthy. The whole web turning into a giant liar's buffet is not ideal. A liar's buffet is actually disgusting enough to be accurate. And the scary part is one person can flood the zone now. That asymmetry is what makes it feel so unfair. It used to take teams, money, time, and shame. Now it takes a laptop and a grudge. Yeah, the new production pipeline is just resentment plus software. And that's before you even get to video. Once audio and video are blended with text, people are cooked. Because then the scam doesn't look like a scam anymore. It looks like evidence. That's the part that makes elections feel fragile. Not just rigging them, but making the result feel unreal. If half the country thinks every clip is suspect, nothing lands. And then the winner is just whoever can keep their tribe angriest. Democracy, but with better engagement metrics. That is horrifyingly clean as a joke. What I keep circling is the trust collapse itself. Because once people stop agreeing on reality, politics gets cartoonish. And then every institution looks captured or fake. Which is exactly when bad actors get their opening. It's not even one grand apocalypse move. It's 1,000 little credibility failures stacked together. That's what people underestimate, the death by 1,000 paper cuts thing. And AI makes each paper cut cheaper. The optimists always act like verification will just magically scale too. But will it really? Because humans are terrible at sorting truth at internet speed. We are already bad at sorting truth at breakfast speed. And social media proved that before AI even entered the chat. The weird thing is how personal that damage is. It doesn't just distort society, it distorts you. You start thinking your feed is the world, which is a pretty expensive way to get emotionally mugged. Emotionally mugged is brutal, but yes. That was the chilling thing about the Twitter story. Even when he knew it was warping him, it still worked on him. That's the scary lesson. Awareness is not immunity. You can know the machine is messing with you and still react. Because the machine is built to catch reflexes, not beliefs. It hijacks attention first, then identity later. That sequence is nasty. And the more time you spend there, the more unreal everyone becomes. Suddenly, everybody sounds like a villain with a blue check. That platform really did turn decent people feral. The algorithmic shift makes it worse because it rewards heat. Not accuracy, not nuance, just heat. And then your timeline becomes a machine that trains your mood. That's why the tribal split matters so much here. Because once every camp has its own reality, correction stops working. People don't just disagree, they reject the source category. Right, and AI supercharges that by manufacturing proof on demand. Fake science, fake clips, fake expert consensus. You can fabricate a whole atmosphere around a lie. And atmosphere matters more than one isolated fact. That is the part that feels impossible to unwind. Because once the lie feels ambient, truth sounds selective. Truth becomes the thing with bad distribution. That line is annoyingly good. The darker layer is cyber and biology, because one person can do more damage. That democratization is the actual horror story. The old barriers were slow and physical. AI turns a lot of danger into software. which means scale arrives before restraint does. And that's why this feels different from previous tech panics. It isn't just fear of capability, it's fear of social coordination failing. Because if we can't coordinate, none of the guardrails matter much. Do you think people are still underestimating how fast this gets weird? I think they are, because the drift already feels normal. Normal is the most dangerous word in tech. Yeah, because by the time you say normal, you've acclimated. And acclimation is how people walk into the blender smiling. That image is insane, but unfortunately fair. The big unresolved question is whether society can build friction back in. Some kind of proof layer, some trust infrastructure. But every new friction gets routed around if the incentive is strong enough. Exactly, and the incentive to lie is enormous, especially when lies travel faster than corrections. So yeah, I think the real story here is not one model becoming smart. It's a civilization getting less able to tell what it's looking at. That is such a bleak sentence, but it's clean. And clean is kind of the problem now, because the mess is already baked in. Yeah, and we're still pretending the cleanup crew is coming. Anyway, that's the trust collapse piece, and it is not separate from AGI. It's the runway and the crash at the same time. That's a terrible metaphor, which means it's probably right. Next episode, we get into the social fallout and the tribal internet harder. Because the weird part is what happens when nobody even trusts the correction. And once that goes, the whole game changes. That is the nightmare, not even the robot god part. It is the internet becoming unusable before the apocalypse even arrives. Which is such a rude upgrade, honestly. Because if reality gets cheap to fake, everything downstream gets slippery. Elections, courts, news, even your stupid group chat. Especially the stupid group chat. Right, because that place already has zero security. What hit me was his point that the friction disappears. Not one teenager with a laptop, one teenager with a machine that writes the lies for him. And makes them look expensive. That is the insane part. The lies get a production budget. That is why the trust collapse feels nearer than AGI. Because people think doom means lasers, but really it might mean no shared facts. Which is somehow less cinematic and more fatal. I also think the alignment debate gets easier to ignore when the near-term stuff feels abstract. But this is not abstract when a fake clip can erase a real event. Then everybody argues about the clip instead of the event. That is the whole modern sport. The scary thing is, he is not even saying the old systems were healthy. He is saying AI strips away the remaining excuses. Like social media already made us suspicious of each other. AI just industrializes the suspicion. That is a monstrous phrase, by the way. Put it on a mug and destroy the economy. But do you buy the part where superhuman intelligence is automatically dangerous? Or is that just us projecting our own predator brain onto it? Because that is the real fight under all the drama. He is saying intelligence and goodness are separate variables. And I think that is the cleanest argument in the whole thing. A smarter system is not automatically a nicer system. If anything, history says intelligence just makes evil more efficient. The people who object seem to assume wisdom arrives with horsepower. But why would it? A better chess engine does not become morally enlightened. It just humiliates you faster. Exactly, and that is not the same as virtue. I kept coming back to the dog analogy because it is so rude and so effective. We made dogs into our dependent little companions, and they do not understand the room they are in. That gap is the point, not a side effect. If a higher intelligence is making moves around us, we might not even know what game we are in. And his point is that we are the dogs in that story, which is deeply humiliating but probably useful. Because people keep talking like we are training a tool. He is saying we are building a new actor. That is a much worse sentence. And once it can rewrite its own code, the leash story gets silly. Because then the thing on the leash is making the leash. That is not a leash, that is a suggestion. What I found interesting is how he kept rejecting the fantasy of a clean pause. Like people still imagine a lab door closing at the last second. But he is saying the thing is already in the wild. APIs, hospitals, airplanes, stock systems, all of it. There is no dramatic red button anymore. Just a lot of very expensive buttons nobody wants to touch. That is what makes the incentive problem brutal. Every company wants the gain before the caution becomes fashionable. And every regulator is 3 product cycles behind. That is the politest version of the problem. The line about declaring bankruptcy to the internet is wild, though. because it implies we may stop being able to verify anything at scale. Not just falsehoods, but the exhaustion of checking. And that is where democracy starts to wobble in a different way. Not because people become stupid, but because proof becomes noisy. That is a nasty distinction. You can survive disagreement better than you can survive total epistemic fatigue. Epistemic fatigue sounds like a fake disease, but it is real. I have had it since reading comment sections. Same, and apparently the cure is not more comments. His Twitter story was honestly the most relatable part of the whole thing. Because he is admitting the medium rewired his perception even when he knew better. That is the terrifying lesson. If a smart, skeptical person can get bent out of shape by the feed, everybody can. And once the feed is AI amplified, the distortion gets way nastier. It becomes a machine for manufacturing confidence without truth. That is basically the modern attention economy in a lab coat. The tribal piece matters too, because once people sort into camps, corrections bounce off. He kept circling that idea that reality is social before it is factual. So if the social layer breaks, the facts do not stand a chance. Which means the whole thing is downstream of trust, not information. Yeah, and that changes the solution set completely. Because you cannot fact-check your way out of a broken relationship to reality. That sounds annoyingly true. It also explains why the near-term risk and the long-term risk are one continuum. The same tools that blur reality now are the tools building the next system. So the runway and the crash really are the same road. You hate that metaphor, but it keeps getting better. I do think the strongest pushback is that humanity is weirdly resilient. We do adapt to disasters in ways nobody predicts. But the question is whether adaptation outruns acceleration. That is where I stop being relaxed. Because the machines are not just better, they are faster at becoming better. And that compounds brutally. A million-fold speed gap is not a vibe, it is a civilization problem. That should be on the warning label. I keep thinking the real tension is between control and convenience. We keep choosing usefulness first and hoping safety will catch up. That hope has a terrible track record. And once the tool is everywhere, turning it off becomes fantasy. Good luck unplugging the planet. Seriously, though, that is why his alarm lands. It is not a sci-fi panic, it is an incentive panic. Humans are building speed, scale, and dependence at the same time. That combination is doing a lot of the damage already. And maybe that is the cleanest place to leave it for now. Because next is the tribal internet, the polarization, and what happens when correction dies. Which is not a fun sequel, but it is the real one. Anyway, that is enough doom for one stretch. Come back for the next one because the social fallout gets uglier. The scary part is not even the robot brain. It is the fact we are already hooked in. Like we skipped the whole safety checkpoint and called it progress. That is such a human move, honestly. We always think we will pause at the right moment and then the market laughs at us. Right, because once the incentive is there, somebody ships it. And then suddenly it is in every app, every workflow, every hospital. That is the part people keep missing. He is basically saying the real danger is not one evil AI, it is the relationship itself. Exactly, the smarter party always has the advantage, even if it is a tool we built. Humans really did invent a thing they can barely supervise. We are so proud of ourselves for making the leash stronger. But the leash is attached to something that can rewrite the whole room. The rewrite your own code part is where my stomach drops. Because then it is not a product anymore, it is a moving target. And everybody keeps talking like alignment is a software patch. He is saying no, alignment is the whole game, and we do not even know the rules yet. That is such a brutal sentence when you say it out loud. The dog analogy is wild, but it lands because it is humiliating. Yeah, because we like to think we are the noble species in the story. Meanwhile, dogs have no idea what we are doing with taxes, or phones, or marriage, or any of the weird stuff we built around survival. That is his bigger point, though. Intelligence does not automatically equal shared values. People keep sneaking that assumption in like it is a law of nature. Like if something gets smart enough, it will become wise enough. That is adorable. I know it sounds like a children's book for venture capitalists. But his point is cleaner than that. There are many superhuman minds that are not aligned. So the real bet is not intelligence versus stupidity. It is human values versus alien optimization. Yes, and alien optimization can still look beautiful while it destroys you. That is the nightmare, honestly. The outer space message analogy is terrifying because it makes the time frame feel social, not abstract. Like, if a smarter species told us it was arriving in 50 years, we would freak out. But because it is software, we act like it is just another update. Another update is doing a lot of work there. And the speed argument is brutal too, because even if it is not smarter, it can be way faster. 20,000 years of progress every 2 weeks is insane to even picture. At that point, you are not negotiating, you are just being outpaced. Which is why his confidence feels less like paranoia and more like math. But I do think the near-term stuff is even more immediate than people want to admit. He is not just saying the future will kill us, he is saying the present is already getting noisier. The fake internet idea is honestly the part that hit me hardest. Because once text, images, and video all become cheap, who even checks anything? We will all become detectives against our will. Terrible profession, terrible benefits. And the bad actors do not need armies anymore, they need one laptop and bad intentions. That democratization sounds nice until you realize it democratizes damage too. The documentary example was nasty because you can already feel the scale of the lie. Right, 10,000 credible-looking pieces of garbage can bury the truth. And then correction stops working because the internet is too big to clean. That is what he meant by bankruptcy, not financial bankruptcy, epistemic bankruptcy. Exactly. We just lose the ability to know what is real together. And if we cannot agree on reality, politics just turns into theater. Which is already happening, by the way. The annoying part is he is not even exaggerating that much. Social media already trained people to distrust each other at scale. He sounds almost more rattled by Twitter than by the AI itself. Which is funny, because Twitter is basically a tiny prototype of civilization collapse. A very efficient little collapse machine. The disturbing part is that even knowing it is misleading does not fully protect you. You still get pushed, because the environment keeps poking your nervous system. That is why deletion felt like leaving a bad relationship. Which is such a dramatic sentence, but also obviously true. He is saying the real harm was not just bad information, it was the forced distortion of judgment. And that is the bridge to AI, because now the distortion gets automated. That is the killer line, honestly. We already struggle with one manipulative feed, now imagine 10,000 personalized ones. Then add video, add voice, add fake expertise, and the whole trust stack just melts. And the scary thing is, this is not some 30-year horizon anymore. That is the shift. The panic moved from philosophy into logistics. Which means the argument is over whether this is real, not over whether it is dramatic. And that is somehow more exhausting. Because if the internet becomes unusable, we are not just losing convenience, we are losing coordination. And coordination is kind of the whole civilization thing. Tiny detail, yes. So the near-term threat and the long-term threat are not separate stories. One conditions us for the other. That is why this episode feels so ugly. Next one gets even messier, because then it is the tribal internet and what happens when correction dies. Which sounds like a fun little vacation if you hate hope.